alt bist denn du? 12? Und du? 14? Und du, warum seid ihr hier? Wollt ihr Krieg spielen? Geht nach Hause, spielt was anderes.
Wer sind Sie denn? Was wollen Sie hier?
Ich will meinen Sohn, und zwar lebend.
Sie sollten lieber stolz sein auf Ihren Sohn. Er hat 2 Panzer abgeschossen. Der Führer persönlich wird ihn heute dafür auszeichnen.
Sie sind jung. An welcher Front haben Sie gekämpft?
Ich hatte noch nicht die Ehre.
Es ist Ihr Glück, dass Sie noch nie eine Schlacht erleben mussten. Und jetzt seien Sie vernünftig und schicken die Kinder nach Hause.
Wir werden die Stellung halten bis zum letzten Mann.
Und welche Stellung soll das sein? Das ist keine Stellung, das ist eine Falle. Die Russen werden euch von 2 Seiten in die Zange nehmen. Und ihr könnt noch nicht mal wegrennen.
Wir werden zurückschießen.
Mit was denn?
Wir benutzen die Flak als Artillerie.
Die Russen sind mit mehreren Armeen im Anmarsch, mit Panzern und schwerer Artillerie. Ihr glaubt doch nicht im Ernst, ihr könntet diesen Sturm auch nur für 5 Minuten aufhalten.
Wir haben es dem Führer geschworen.
Habt ihr denn noch immer nicht begriffen, der Krieg ist verloren, es ist zu Ende?
Feigling!
Haut ab! Jetzt! Wenn die Russen kommen und ihr seid noch da, geht ihr alle drauf.
Am 30. April 1945 hat der Führer Selbstmord begangen und damit alle, die ihm Treue geschworen hatten, im Stich gelassen.
Getreu dem Befehl des Führers wart ihr, deutsche Soldaten, bereit, den Kampf um Berlin fortzusetzen, obwohl eure Munition zur Neige ging und die Gesamtlage den weiteren Widerstand sinnlos machte. Ich ordne die sofortige Einstellung jeglichen Widerstandes an. Jede Stunde, die ihr weiterkämpft, verlängert die entsetzlichen Leiden der Zivilbevölkerung Berlins und unserer Verwundeten. Im Einvernehmen mit dem Oberkommando der sowjetischen Truppen fordere ich euch auf, sofort den Kampf einzustellen.
Weigling, ehemaliger Befehlshaber des Verteidigungsbereichs Berlin.
May 2, 1945. With just a few days to go before World War II officially ends in Europe, the Battle of Berlin has just ended. There have been more than 10 days of fierce battle in the streets of the German capital, to which must be added years of massive bombardment, which have left Berlin completely devastated. To be exact, since it was bombed for the first time in June 1940, until its last air raid in April 1945, the Allies have dropped a total of 68,000 tons of explosives on Berlin, which is equivalent to the destructive power of 4 atomic bombs as the one launched at Hiroshima. To this damage must be added the damage caused by the fighting once the Soviets attacked the city by land, so we can imagine the situation in Berlin at the end of the battle. So Neck, who first took over the city government right after the battle. His first measure was to dissolve any type of German political organization that might remain in the city, and to confiscate all weapons, cameras, radios, or set himself the following objectives in this order of importance. First of all, to guarantee the food supply to the population of Berlin. Secondly, to reopen sanitary spaces that could take care of the wounded and sick in the city, before an epidemic broke out. And thirdly and fourthly, his priorities were to settle the refugees and to clear the streets of Berlin that were littered with rubble. Likewise, he would also start working on restoring the water and light supplies in the city that had been destroyed. According to the historian Antony Beevor, of the more than 3.5 million inhabitants that Berlin had in 1940, now in May 1945, only about 2 million remained, to which must be added groups of refugees who did not stop arriving. Although for the inhabitants of Berlin, it was in this second stage when these events increased. Despite the fact that this type of act was prohibited, there was a lot of tolerance on the part of Berzarin and the Soviet High Command, because they did not want to deprive their soldiers of their particular revenge for what they had suffered during all the years of contention in their territory. Added to this situation was the tens of thousands of corpses that were still unburied in the city. Many of them were entombed. Was also made to bury both the Berlin civilians and the German and Soviet soldiers separately in common graves. In any case, it could not be avoided that many diseases appeared in the city during these first weeks, due to the poor hygienic conditions, the lack of food and the weakness of the population, and the lack of health care. It must be taken into account that a large population was injured by the fighting, and there were neither doctors nor medication to treat them all, so many died from causes that in other normal conditions would not have been fatal. Pneumonia, flu, tuberculosis, cholera outbreaks, typhoid fever, and dysentery were the most common illnesses in these first weeks. On the other hand, and as we have previously pointed out, the city's trains, trams, canals, and most of the bridges were either destroyed or blocked. This made it difficult for all traffic in the city, and the shipment of such vital supplies, which is why it was a top priority. Tens of thousands of Berliners either voluntarily or compulsorily participated in these repairs, and by the third week of May they had removed most of the rubble blocking the streets of Berlin. A few guarding housing. It is estimated that 2/3 of the houses and flats in Berlin had been destroyed, and only the other remaining third was habitable even if it was not in good condition. Thus, and with a massive arrival of refugees in Berlin, the lack of housing to accommodate all civilians was a problem that worsened. Because labor was limited, and the reconstruction works were abysmal, what was done to alleviate the situation of housing shortage was to set up large shelters, establish several families in the few floors that were in acceptable conditions, and divert part of the refugees who wanted to enter the city. This was undoubtedly one of the problems that took the longest to solve. Turning now to the question of food, we have to indicate that the first thing the Soviets did was establish ration cards among the population of Berlin, which continued with what the Berliners already had under the German authorities in recent months. As always happens with these issues, 3 levels were established in these ration cards, with which more or less food could be obtained depending on the rank and work activity of each person. However, despite what each citizen had assigned on paper, in reality they could be given what was available at that time. Due to the poor situation of the communication routes that limited the merchandise that could reach Berlin, during the first weeks the supplies that the German authorities had in the city were rushed, until little by little more were arriving from abroad. A striking measure that was used was to encourage Berliners to plant vegetables in all corners of the city, and thus have their own production that could alleviate the food needs of the city. Of course, the black market was common during these first months, and those Berliners who had jewelry or any valuables tried to exchange it for food for both the Soviet and American military. But at this time, it was not only jewelry, musical instruments, paintings, or carpets that were exchanged for food, as many Berlin women were also forced to use their bodies as currency. Well, this was the situation that characterized life in Berlin during the weeks following the end of the war, until little by little the months passed and the basic services of the city were being repaired. If you are interested in delving into this issue of the Battle of Berlin, and what happened to the city during the months following the war, I leave you in the description the programs we did with Daniel Ortega and Jose Antonio Marquez Periano, in which we analyzed widely this topic. Thank you all for being part of this community, and especially the sponsors who make this possible. Subscribe and share this program if you liked it, and we'll see each other here as always, next Thursday and Sunday. See you soon.
Take one. All right, sir.
I was the first one to arrive. Winston Churchill was the second one to arrive. He came the day after I arrived, and Stalin was 2 days later. I heard afterwards that Stalin had had a slight heart attack. I didn't find out about it until he had arrived and told me what the trouble was. But each one of us gave a state dinner in turn. I gave the first one, Mr. Churchill gave the second one, and Stalin gave the third one. In Stalin's dinner, he kept drinking out of a bottle. Everybody else was drinking vodka, or trying to. It's hard to get down, you know, if you're not used to it. At any rate, I turned around to him and I said, "That must be a different brand you're drinking." He had a little glass about the size of a thimble. I reached over and took his bottle and poured it in my vodka glass after it was empty, and it was French wine. He wasn't drinking vodka at all. And I said, "You putting one over on us, aren't you?" "Oh, well," he says, "you know, my heart won't stand this heavy drinking, and I have to go slowly." Well, you know, the Russians never put on a dinner without a whole raft of toasts. At the Russian state dinner at Potsdam, they had 14 toasts. And I learned early in the game not to take a drink every time they offered a toast, but just back out like you're taking one, because you would be unable to carry on the business of the meeting. It was an education in itself to be dealing with two brilliant men such as Winston Churchill and Stalin. And they were representing Great Britain and Russia. We had to move all our divisions that had not been used in France during this war, had to move them across the United States and send them to the Pacific, because we still had a war on our hands in the Far East. And it was necessary that that be done. that was one of the reasons for the meeting at Yalta and at Potsdam. We had hoped that Russia would get into the Japanese war on our side. Russia didn't come into the Japanese war until after the bombs had been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They saw immediately that Japan was going to surrender, and they wanted to be in to kill. And they came in just about 3 days before the Japanese surrendered. And they caused us so much trouble at Yalta and at the Western European surrender that I made it a point that they would have a representative at the Japanese surrender, but they would have nothing to say about what took place. We didn't have any trouble with them, with the Japanese. We got the thing straightened out the way we wanted it and carried it through to the end. But if the Russians had been able to get in there, they'd have caused us just as much trouble in Japan as they did in Europe. But they didn't have a chance. And that's the only reason they didn't do it.
Okay.
Another difference between World War II and World War I. At the end of World War I, if you look at the disposition of German troops, they're abroad. They're occupying Belgium, Luxembourg, parts of France. Nobody's in Germany. Yes, the Germans had really lousy meals during the war, but German civilians did not feel the full brunt of what their government had done. And therefore, Prime Minister Winston Churchill and President Franklin Roosevelt felt that it was really critical to have boots on the ground in Berlin to let the Germans know exactly what had happened to them and let them feel the war that they had inflicted on others in order to end it.
When we're trying to explain who wins a big war like this, by 1942, what is the way in which Germany would have won?
Define win. If Germany's win means controlling the entire continent plus Britain plus Russia, you come up with one answer. If Hitler had just done the Anschluss, right, that's Austria joins, and maybe done the Sudeten number, which is a large German population, and quit, he'd be called Bismarck II, a genius. Like, no losses, gets to keep that bigger area. That's not who he is. So you need to define what win is. Germany is potentially can be invaded overland everywhere, whereas Britain can't. And then Germany just cannot deploy a navy the way Britain can. It's just geography. And therefore, Germany should have bought a completely different navy. Skip the surface fleet. Buy a lot more U-boats. Maybe they would have zapped the British before the United States gets its act together in either world war, right? Do it fast. They didn't do it.
In the late 19th and early 20th century, the Japanese Empire was under rapid expansion, fueled by a feudal-born military economy and European technology. First invading the chain of islands north and south of its home island, fighting a bitter war with Russia for control over Manchuria, and annexing Korea, all before World War I. The outbreak of World War I gave Japan the perfect platform to expand further, allying against Germany and taking control of German positions in the Pacific, making Japan the dominant power in the East, with its sphere of influence extending from the Asian mainland to the mid-Pacific. To maintain this influence, Japan had undergone rapid industrial expansion, growing from a technologically primitive feudal country and developing the third largest navy in the world, with only the United States and the British navies challenging it. With US territory in the Philippines and Hawaii, and British territory in Malaya, Hong Kong, and British Borneo, conflict was inevitable and tension in the Pacific was rapidly growing. On September 27, 1940, Japan entered an alliance with Germany and Italy, a clear warning to the Americans: enter the war in Europe and you will face war in the Pacific. This warning did not come unchallenged, and the United States moved its Pacific Fleet from California to Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. From here, many of us are familiar with the story. Japan capitalized on this ill-advised show of force and took the United States by surprise, attempting to wipe out the US Navy in the Pacific in one foul swoop. A decisive victory that announced Japan to the Western world as a force to be reckoned with. At the height of their power in World War II, Japan seized control from Western powers in China and Southeast Asia. But the war machine was doomed to failure and was destined to over
Lieutenant Tyler.
Sir, this is Private Elliott, Opana Point. There's a large formation of planes coming in from the north, 140 miles, 3 degrees east.
Yeah? Well, don't worry about it.
Get that guy's number, Dick. I'll report it for safety violations.
Japan's decision to attack Pearl Harbor is a pivotal error. They are already grossly overextended in China. They want to cut out foreign aid. Remember that Hawaii is not a U.S. state, doesn't become a state until 59 or something. So, and they probably take this racist view of Hawaiians, of whoever they think Hawaiians are. And so their idea is we're going to take a newspaper, thwap the dog on the snout, and the dog will quit. And instead, you create great power allies all across the Pacific for the Chinese. So yeah, there are pivotal errors that you can make, at which point there is no return for the status quo ante. You have seen Putin make a pivotal error. He was getting away with hanging on to the Donbass and the Crimea. Now he made the pivotal error to try to take the whole enchilada. There is no going back on that error.
Senators and representatives, I have the distinguished honor of presenting the President of the United States.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. I believe that I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but will make it very certain that this form of treachery shall never again endanger us. Hostilities exist. There is no blinking at the fact that our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph. So help us God. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
in second platoon?
I don't see him.
First squad, move out! Guy this quick, ring. Jesus, you needed some exercise? You got lost. 100 landing craft heads for one beach and this guy gets lost. I'm glad we did. Jesus, what a mess. Any theories why they ain't shooting? It's getting on my nerves. Maybe they're all dead. What do you think, Doc? You think they're all dead? Mike, take 6 men and bring that gun over the beach. Hold on, second platoon! Let's move out! Stay down, come on, come on! Move.
the iron ring of Allied sea power closes round Japan, big American naval units carry the fight ever nearer to the home islands of Nippon. Planes return to their carriers. Some of them come in the hard way. Today, Japan is desperate. The American Pacific Fleet, backed by powerful British units, is taking fearful toll of enemy aircraft. Japan's answer is the use of a new weapon, kamikazes, suicide pilots who dive squarely into Allied ships to sink them. Japan's growing desperation is reflected in this fanatical sacrifice of pilots and aircraft in a crazy attempt to hold the Allies off. Jap newsreels in our hands take us inside Japan, revealing the story behind the kamikazes. The Japanese, long trained to blind obedience and worship of the emperor, teach their children that ceremonial suicide is one of the greatest acts of which man is capable. Kamikaze pilots are men trained for death. Nearly all the suicide pilots are between 16 and 20 years old. Celebrations are held to honor them when their training is finished. Prayers are said, and they need them, for they're already as good as dead. The prettiest geisha girls entertain them. Their pictures appear in Japanese newspapers as national heroes. Garbed in ceremonial robes, their heads are shaved except for a small patch of hair. During their last few days of life, they walk solemnly through the streets. They're ready for their mission of death. This is their big day. To cries of Banzai, they prepare for their last flight, which may destroy an Allied ship. Many kamikaze planes are small. They're launched from large aircraft and guided by a suicide pilot. He wears no parachute. He's locked in the cockpit. His plane is stripped of landing gear and detonates with a shattering explosion on contact. First pictures of these killer weapons come from Okinawa, scene of the bloodiest fighting yet in the Pacific. Called the Baka bomb, they're the Jap version of the Nazi V1. Over 2,000 pounds of explosive are packed into the nose. Now for the first time we show actual shots of these amazing kamikaze attacks, filmed at extreme peril. A near miss on a destroyer. An aircraft carrier of the Essex class takes a direct hit. Firefighting squads rush to keep the inferno from spreading. Suicide planes come plunging to destruction from the cover of low cloud. Even though they're hit, they still come on. The vulnerable carriers are their special target. Only 10% ever get through the terrific screen of the outer ring of Ack-Ack fire. Of these, 90% are blasted out of the sky before they reach the vital core of the fleet. For 8 hours, the tense and terrifying battle for survival went on. Allied Task Force 58 fought for its very life. Kamikaze is costly for the Japs. In 2 months, they lost more than 3,500 aircraft of all kinds. Famous American carrier, the Bunker Hill, is hit. A kamikaze pilot plunged his aircraft squarely among the carrier's planes. The flight deck is a blazing hell. Other ships come alongside to help quell the flames. The hangar deck of the Bunker Hill was white hot from end to end. Thrown into a 70-degree turn, Bunker Hill was swept by tons of water, a maneuver which saved the ship. In the Okinawa campaign, Jap air attacks sank 33 Allied ships and damaged 50 others. But no battleship, cruiser, or carrier has gone under. The Bunker Hill, like the Franklin, will fight again. On another carrier, an American plane lands on and loses its emergency tank. It bursts into a raging inferno. But the pilot is saved. Another pilot is trapped in his blazing aircraft. His chance of survival is very, very thin. But from almost certain death, he's brought through to safety. Aboard the Bunker Hill, flagship of Admiral Mitcher, several hundred men were killed. Suffering and death marks every island milestone on the road to Japan. In 2 months, Allied ships off Okinawa lost 4,000 dead and as many wounded. Among the heaviest naval casualties of the war. For the dead, a final volley. But the Allied ships sail forward. Neither kamikaze nor any other form of hell in the Pacific can save doomed Japan.